Welcome to Twisted Remedies. I'm your host, Justin Kucher, and this is a podcast about the benefits of jiu-jitsu and other non-traditional remedies in trauma recovery. And here we are, back on Twisted Remedies podcast. My guest today is the farthest away guest I have had. My guest is Garrett Hartley from Fairbanks, Alaska. So for those of you paying attention, I've had a couple of in-studio guests, and the rest have been remote, but nobody probably as remote as Garrett comes to us today. So Garrett is a jiu-jitsu black belt, karate black belt, trains in a whole bunch of different martial arts. The owner-instructor at Revolution Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Fairbanks. He runs a nonprofit called Limitless Advance, which was not that hard to say until I just tried to say it just now. He is a U.S. Army combatives coach and instructor, MMA referee, and like he has any spare time at all, he's also a contractor, which I think a lot from what I saw is a lot of that is like also rehabbing kind of old houses in Alaska and the challenges that come with that. And a former bush pilot, which apparently is a prerequisite if you're going to go anywhere in Alaska. So I just encapsulated a whole bunch of Garrett's life and experience into a few sentences. So Garrett, welcome to the podcast, and it's good to have you on.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to be here, and I have to say that I'm also very honored to be here. I've listened to the podcasts that you've recorded up to this point, and I feel humbled and honored to be amongst some of the guests that you've had on so far. So thank you very much for having me here today. You pretty much covered about 25 years worth of my life in a very eloquent sentence there. So, I started the martial arts back in 1997 when I was 15 years old. It's kind of an interesting story there. I just never found it in me to say no to an opportunity to learn and train. And that's really ultimately culminated in bringing me here to Alaska, where I now run a couple of different businesses and work with our military using the martial arts to aid and assist them the best that I can.
That's awesome. Now, if I understand your story right, your start in martial arts was basically that was your act of rebellion because you were sneaking over there and it was costing you $1, which is that's a pretty cool. If you're gonna rebel, you might as well go do some martial arts.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much accurate. I grew up in a very strict home and environment, and we lived off-grid in northwest Montana, about 30 miles out of town. And given the circumstances, I ended up having to ride my bicycle into town twice a week for tutoring and things like that. And so I was getting my cardio in, getting my exercise on my bicycle, and I secretly started taking martial arts classes on my ride home. That was one of those things I wasn't allowed to do. So I was definitely an act of rebellion, but ultimately I got caught and was grounded for a little while after that. So, but 15 years old is when I started training in karate. It took me about 4 years to get my black belt in karate, and then ultimately ended up teaching karate and being very active in the karate arts for about 13 years. So from that point forward, owned and operated a karate school here in Fairbanks, Alaska for about 5 years, and till I decided to take my martial arts career a different direction.
Yep. And then at some point, jiu-jitsu comes along, and that had an appeal that reading your bio, you were like, I had to do this thing that was, that was out there. What was it about jujitsu that got your attention?
Well, I think, I grew up in the 90s and born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. So I was always very interested in the martial arts from a very young age. It was kind of a major part of my interest from some of my earliest memories. So when Hoist Gracie and UFC one came about, that captured my attention just as much as it did probably most of the martial arts world at that point in time. And it was kind of one of those things that was so revolutionary. It was this new idea that had just arrived on the scene in the United States only a few years prior. So as I started to grow older and had seen that developing in the U.S., it was still illegal in most states. It was still kind of the underbelly of the martial arts society. And I was very interested in this art that seemed to be superior. And having 4 years of karate and a black belt, I decided I really wanted to round out my self defense knowledge by learning something that would that I could defend myself on the ground. And at that point in time, there were some people in my own age group that were high school wrestlers and, kind of the feared bullies in my community that it scared me that they could potentially take advantage of something I didn't know, which was grappling. So I started taking jujitsu. In October of 2003, there was a school that had opened up in my hometown in Kalispell, Montana. It's long since closed now, but it was called the Ultimate Submission Academy, and they were teaching no-gi, jujitsu, and Vale Tudo. And
Oh, wow.
so, I started training there about 6 months into my training, had a terrible mishap on the mat and ended up breaking my neck. Um, and that put me out for about a year and a half. During that time frame, I moved to Alaska. As you mentioned before, I was a bush pilot, and that's what brought me up here to Alaska. I was flying for a charity organization out into the bush, and as my healing journey progressed, I decided it was time to get back into this art that was legitimate enough to take my life, and even in training. So I've
Right.
kind of always had a flair for, I guess, extremism. So that kind of drew me back, knowing that it was something that was legit and dangerous, and that I had the ability to continue training here in Fairbanks.
Yeah. So I'm curious. You made me think of this while so you get to the point in karate where you've got a black belt, which that takes time to achieve. It takes work and all of the things that come with it. And I'm wondering, when you start doing jujitsu, was it? I've met people over the years who are, maybe have a black belt in another art, like a stand up art, taekwondo or something, and
Hmm.
start jujitsu and are surprised by, wait a minute, this is, you can't just step into it. Like a black belt from another art doesn't translate the same, is kind of my read on it. And I'm curious if you had the same kind of feeling when you started.
I did. I did. I don't want to say that I had a false sense of security from my karate black belt, but I kind of had a false sense of security.
Right.
I realized during my first class, after the second time I went to the bathroom to throw up, that there was a huge world that I was missing. And that what I knew and what I was actually fairly good at and proficient in, both in the dojo and out of the dojo, was not enough. It was not enough. And that there really was something out there that was much more dynamic than what I had experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you start training and you get this what sounds like a severe neck injury,
Hmm.
and a lot of people that puts them off the mat. And I know that it sounds like in the brief time that we've talked, you're and from reading kind of your story, you're not somebody that shies from adversity,
Yeah.
but that's a significant injury to come back from.
Mhm.
What was that? Was it mindset? Was it a combination of things? What got you through that healing process and rebuilding and getting back on the mats?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it was a significant injury. All but 3 millimeters of my odontoid vertebrae was broken. So that
Wow.
is the vertebrae, for those who don't know, that your brainstem actually slides through a bone ring in the odontoid vertebrae, and all but 3 millimeters of that broke. So had that other 3 millimeters broken, it would have severed my brainstem, and I would have been dead.
Yep.
And so that is a significant injury. It did take about 6 years to fully recover from. Um, I don't have any problems with it now, but recovery from that was long and slow. It took a lot of patience that I didn't have at that time, being an untempered, 20-year-old man. I I can't say that I really relied on any one like philosophy or belief, other than the fact that by nature I just don't know how to quit, and that's both good and bad. As I get older, I realize that I should have let go of things much sooner, certain things in life, and jujitsu has taught me some of those lessons, that holding on to something is not always the right decision.
Yep. Yep.
But it just that I guess I didn't know that I had the option of quitting. To be real honest with you, at that point in time, I moved forward because that was where my interests lie, and my personal philosophy has always been, as eloquently stated, by the Stoic philosophy, that the obstacle becomes the way. And when we run
Mm.
into these obstacles in life, or in business, in training, the obstacle becomes the path that we have to follow. It's not an option to stop and turn around and go back. It becomes the way. It becomes the object and the next goal to achieve. So that's my personal philosophy, and I think I didn't understand that fully at that time in my life, but in retrospect, I believe that's what was happening.
But you knew that for whatever reason you there was no this was not going to take you out of that path. You were just going to have to you were sidelined, you're delayed, you're just going to overcome this and you're just going to keep driving forward. So I mean
Hmm.
there's a definite whichever philosophy that is, there's a definite mindset that comes with that where you're like I'm just not quitting.
Hmm.
That's not an option. And
Hmm.
regardless of if you knew what to call it at the time, I think it's clearly like this is not going to stop me. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
commendable.
Thank you. As I get older and I learn more about myself, and have gone through counseling and things over the years due to life events, I've really learned that unconsciously at that point in my life I was really trying to gain control, and it's something I didn't have growing up, was control of my own life. So the martial arts really gave me the confidence to be able to carry myself and to approach life head on. And knowing what I know about myself, quitting would have been giving up on that sense of security that I was gaining through the martial arts. So if we're going to boil it down to what was the mindset, I think that would probably be the unconscious reason,
Yeah.
that was not really understood at that point, and it's really only come to light in my life over the past 5 or 6 years, that some of the things that I was chasing that I didn't really understand, and the holes in my life that the martial arts have filled.
Yeah. I fully understand that in so many ways.
Yeah.
that is, there's a lot of similarity there. So, I mentioned at the top of this that you're out in Fairbanks, and that
Hmm.
just for people listening, we went through a whole. We started this thing and had some technical difficulties because Garrett's in Alaska, and I think about it drives home the point that Alaska is a different place, and
Yeah.
really to drive that point home, this this struck me as I was getting set up today. Like, you think about, like, when I send my scheduling emails out, typically it's, yep, I'll respond, and you had the most unique and most Alaskan response of anybody so far. And I think you said something to the effect of, "Yep, I got the link, but I'm gathering fish this week for winter." So I'll look at it when I get a chance. And I was like, that's some perspective that you just don't have sitting down here in the comfortable CONUS. Like, oh,
Right.
he's out gathering fish for the winter, and we'll
Right.
get
Right.
to we'll get to my scheduling email at some point. I just thought that was fascinating. And on that line, I think
Uh,
about the challenges of people I know who have opened, or who run or have opened a jujitsu academy, or really any kind of martial arts business, and it's difficult in most places. But I imagine that is compounded being where you are, given population density, or all of the factors that are Alaska. So how, as somebody who has their own school, how was that a challenge?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. There's to give people a little bit of perspective. Right now, you're on the East Coast. I'm in Fairbanks. We're about 4,500 miles apart right now. So, um, that's a long distance for our signal to bounce off satellites and relay back to you. So, my apologies about the technical difficulties on my end, but I think we're even lucky to get sunlight pumped to us up here. So I appreciate your patience. Um, it is definitely it's a very interesting way of life, and it's not something that I think a lot of people really could understand unless they experience it. Our population here in Fairbanks is largely military and blue collar. There's not a lot of white collar here, although it exists. It's very much a down to earth community of people who are independent and they kind of want their elbow room. And with that being said, there's a lot of hunting and fishing and subsistence lifestyle that is still extremely prevalent. And come here in about a week. It's we're at the end of August right now, so here next week and beginning week of September, our hunting season starts, and life pretty much shut down for a lot of the industries here while people go out and get their meat for the winter, things like that. So we're very connected to the land here, and with that being said, and to segue into your answering your question is that the community here is very independent. We are very much about helping our neighbors, but at a distance. And so, opening a school here was, to me, it was a labor of passion. I had been going to another school locally where I ended up, for various reasons, needing to leave. And I didn't want to stop training. I was a four-stripe blue belt at the time. So the best thing that I knew how to do was create a group of grapplers that could keep me on the mat too. So I started Revolution Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in 2013. Um, the concept actually was born in the end of 2012. We opened our doors in 13, and just started training. And quite honestly, my goal was just to be on the mat. So it didn't really matter to me if people showed up or not. I needed to be on the mat. And that kind of grew. I think that type of, I guess, do or die passion grew and became infectious. And so, I had already had a name in our community. We're a small community. We're about 80,000 people. I'd already had a name in the martial arts here because of previously mentioned karate school as well as my jujitsu training and competition. By that time, my MMA career was coming to a close, so I'd had that reputation as well. Um, but people just started coming and training, and we turned into a core group of students that I still have many of them on the mats with me today. Um, and I don't really know what I would say about the difficulties of it so much as the mindset was I'm going to do this regardless of whether or not I have a big school or a little school. It's not about the money, it's not about the business, it's about the art and the what it's doing for me personally, as well as being able to share that passion and love for jujitsu with other people. So that just kind of led me to where I'm at now. Maybe it was a war of attrition, but we're here. And, I've gone from having two or three students back in that day to having almost 80 students now in a community where there's three other jujitsu schools in town. So, um, that's, I don't believe a pat on the back. I think it's just strictly the fact that we're here to serve our community, to teach people about jujitsu, and just spread that passion of the art with them. And regardless of their reasons of training here, I appreciate each and every one of them, and just do my best to try and invest back into them.
Yeah, I mean, this is that same kind of drive and mindset that got you through this is just it's something you're going to do. And you mentioned a couple of times that a lot of that is because of what you get out of jujitsu and like what it does for you. And I think you mentioned confidence earlier, but I'm curious what there's obviously a deep connection that you have with jujitsu that is driving a lot of this passion and this mindset. And what I don't know if you can go deeper on that as far as like what that is and why it means so much to you, because like you and I talked on the phone a while back, like my kind of journey through trauma is, I was trauma was beating me up and I was in a pretty bad spot mentally. And then I found jujitsu and it was like, and part of this podcast is me trying to figure out why it's such a powerful thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it was for me, it was this thing that I, again, I don't fully understand why, but for me, it was this powerful force that helped get me through some dark times. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm curious, like there's obviously a deep rooted thing about jujitsu that you connect with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's an accurate statement. And, in referencing our previous conversation, you've been through a lot yourself. You've expressed that, as just stated, the connection that jujitsu has given you to healing. And, I think if I'm going to be real honest, looking back at my career, I didn't really understand what jujitsu was doing for me. I just knew that it was helping.
Yeah.
And now that I've been in the art now for 21 years and counting, um, I've begin to discover what a lot of those benefits are. In brief, I grew up in a very abusive home.
Mm.
We were overly controlled. We lived off the grid. We didn't really have any autonomy, and it was a very physically abusive scenario. So I didn't feel that I had any control over my life. It was my destiny was subject to other people,
Yep.
and that wasn't strictly subject to my parents. It was subject to a higher governing structure above that as well. So, um, I didn't have any control over my future, my autonomy, my feelings and beliefs weren't valid. All of these things play into the freedom that I began to gain through the confidence that jujitsu gave me.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of got a taste tester, maybe a sample flight of what the martial arts could do to me when I started training in karate. Jiu-jitsu really, I think what it ultimately did was it gave me an outlet that allowed me to connect my mind and my body and to know that regardless of how bad it gets, I'm still okay. I'm
Yep.
safe. I have answers. I Nobody can do something to me now that hasn't already been done, apart from
Right.
maybe shooting me. I haven't been shot and I haven't been stabbed, so there's that. But
Let's keep that trend.
yeah,
Let's keep that trend moving in that direction.
very yeah, exactly. But as I gain more experience and more understanding of myself and the art, I'm now realizing that what jujitsu ultimately did, subconsciously or unconsciously, was to teach me that um, the problem solving skills under pressure and under duress. And I think that that's where jujitsu comes into play for me, as far as and we'll get into it eventually. Limitless Advance
Yep.
in using jujitsu in therapy is that it ultimately gives its subjects and its students a mind body connection, um, in teaching people how to address their problems head on, as opposed to maybe fawning from them or fleeing from them. There's all of these responses that we can have to our trauma. Um, it kind of gave me this ability to be able to address that problem now, knowing that if I don't, the problem gets worse. Those are probably the difficult lessons that I see in retrospect were the most useful for me. Um, but jujitsu has this draw of community as well. And having come from the lifestyle in the past that I had, the community was not a healthy one. And when I left that community, I didn't feel the freedom to go home. I didn't leave that community until about a year or 2 years after I got to Alaska back in 2004. So um, jujitsu kind of replaced that community. It gave me a sense of belonging with the group of people that I struggled with daily through training, and people that came from all different walks of life who accepted me for who I was because I was there as a partner, not as an adversary.
Yep.
And I had never experienced that before. So I think there's a lot of ways that I could answer that question for you that we probably don't have time in this podcast for, but those would probably be the highlights: was, community, the unconscious ability to face problems and stress, and the mind body connection that I hadn't been taught growing up.
Yeah. It's interesting as you were describing that. I've had several conversations where this kind of thought has come up, and I've said this to a few people lately. But I look at, like, going through trauma is, you kind of have two choices. You can either ignore the trauma and end up with the consequences and all of that comes with it, or you do the work to, find your way out and get to recovery. But that can be
Mm-hmm.
messy, and it might be messy and then not messy and then messy again. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot like jujitsu. Like, it's not, there's always, like, okay, it's messy. Oh, and then, oh, you grow a little bit, and then, oh, it's messy again as you kind of figure this out. And I think there's something in there where it is, it helps with navigating that mess if you're working your way out of trauma, or
Yeah.
it forces you to navigate that, and it makes you more comfortable. Like, you get comfortable in uncomfortable situations,
Yeah.
physically
Yeah.
anyway, and that, the crushing and all of that. But so I think there's some piece of that for sure. But
I would agree, and that's well said. I would agree 100% with that statement. again, in my mind, it goes back to the obstacle becomes the way.
Yep.
Um, if I don't address these things that are um, holding me back or restraining my life, then I'm choosing to turn around and go the other way. And the
Right.
obstacle should become the way. We're finding our way through that and having that self awareness to be able to address our faults, our mistakes, things like that. Jujitsu has taught me a way of doing that. Um, I recall an old analogy I had heard years ago. I don't remember who told me this. It's been years and years ago, but facing our problems in life is a lot like rebuilding a road, where if you're traveling down the highway and the road is bumpy, your car's going to wear out real quick. You're going to lose your shocks. You're going to use your undercarriage is going to come apart if you're driving down a rough road. But you have to fix that road in order to have a smoother journey. But you have to tear the road up before you can make it better.
Yeah.
And I like that analogy. I've used it a lot throughout my life. Is that things kind of have to get worse and get ugly for it to get better, and
Right.
you have to tear things up in order to repair it. So I feel like that kind of goes along hand in hand with trauma and recovery as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're in Alaska, then you get connected somehow with the army. I mean, it's obviously a big, like you said, a big military community. So maybe that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
as maybe that was inevitable given where you are. But how did that relationship come about with the army?
Yeah, so as I stated, Revolution Brazilian Jiu Jitsu we opened our doors in 2013. I began teaching. I had probably 15, 20 students by 2014. Um, the combatives program on Fort Wainwright. We have two military bases right here within about 20 or 30 miles of Fairbanks. We've got Fort Wainwright, which is an army base, the northernmost army base in the U.S. We also have Eielson Air Force Base. Same thing. It's now the northernmost Air Force Base in the United States. So those two bases really provide a lot of population and support to Fairbanks. Um, After having started Revolution Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I started being contacted by the NCOIC of the Army Combatives Program on Fort Wainwright. They were operating at a battalion level. They were not a garrison project. They were operating, teaching individual units combatives. On the battalion level, they contacted me asking me if I would come to work for them and teach them jujitsu. And at the time, I was a purple belt, and I didn't have what I felt was the expertise to be able to fill that role, nor did I have the time. I had just started this school. Um, and again, work in construction as well. So I kind of had a lot on my plate. My life kind of took an unexpected turn, and went through a divorce at that time. Given the circumstances with the partnership that I had in the school, I ended up selling a lot of my portion of the business and our equipment, things like that, off to the business partner that I had at the time, in order to kind of protect it. And I took the Army up on their offer. So, end of 2014, I started coaching on Fort Wainwright, teaching jujitsu to the combatives instructors, and that slowly evolved into becoming an Army combatives instructor as well, and um, running through all of their, the MACP certification program. They took good care of me. I did that for about 3 years. During that time period, General Shields at the time was the U.S. Army Alaska, or the USARAC. He was the general over the USARAC region, which encompassed all of Alaska, including the Aleutian Islands. And he commissioned a competition team, a combatives competition team, where we started to pull athletes from every base, Army and Air Force, throughout the state. Give you an idea of how large of a region that is. Alaska is approximately the same size as two-thirds of the continental U.S. So we're talking about a tremendously large region that we had to pull athletes from. Population isn't as large as continental U.S., but the landmass is. So during that time, we had 36 athletes. We had two 14-man teams and eight alternates that could step in at any time if there was an injury. We would train 6 8 weeks on, 6 8 weeks off, and travel the country competing in combatives, Army combatives tournaments. I ran that program. I oversaw it and was the head coach of that team, um, which is what ends up leading us into Limitless Advance. If you don't mind me segueing
Yeah,
into that
no, go for it.
conversation, after 2014, the end of 2014 through I guess it was about 2.5 years through early 2017, the combatives program was training here, coaching and teaching combatives to the soldiers. um, the if you recall back during that time, President Obama at the time went through a major sequestration and started cutting funding for a lot of programs that also affected the USERAC region as a whole and battalion, on a microscopic level, to where we no longer were able to afford the combatives program as it was at the time. Um, Funding got cut to the program, therefore the coaching, the training, the competition teams, all of that got cut as well. As a result of that, of 36 athletes, another 5 or 6 coaches on top of that. Um, Out of just the athletes alone, 8 of them ended up committing suicide
Oh,
within a year and a half.
wow.
And it was an incredibly difficult thing for me to sit back and watch. Although maybe I wasn't necessarily close personal friends with all of them, I'd poured a lot of the time and attention into each one of those people. And as any other jujitsu school would be concerned, they become family.
Right.
And I had to sit back and ask myself why, and say to myself, I've had some of these thoughts and these struggles before in my own personal life. What made it different for me? How come I am able to overcome some of those thoughts, those intrusive thoughts and urges, and they couldn't? Um, and I think the answer I kept coming back to was the community that I had around me through jujitsu. And since then, there have been multiple attempts and suicide attempts, things like that, amongst that same exact group of people. Thankfully, none of them have succeeded, but it really shined a lot of light on a really massive problem. Now, I'd like to back up and say that the U.S. The Fort Wainwright has the largest suicide rate in the entire United States Army. And it's all combined in one small base in the middle of Alaska, um, outdoes the suicide rate in the rest of the Army worldwide. Conditions here are very harsh and difficult. And I think when you couple that with the isolation that we have here in Alaska, it's difficult to get anywhere. We've got long flights and layovers to get out of state to see family. A lot of these people are in fact isolated from their family, plus our cold environment in the wintertime where it might be 30 to 50 below zero for weeks on end. You don't want to go outside. There's not a lot to do. Plus, the sun doesn't come up for a couple of months. It's
Yeah.
dark. And all of these things combined, I think, create the perfect storm, if you would,
Yeah.
that really induce a lot of these intrusive thoughts. And I believe ultimately that combined with the combat experience that most of our soldiers had at that time, being involved in two separate wars during that time. Just they just didn't have that support structure that they needed, that I had through jujitsu and the community that I'd created around me. Um, so that's where Limitless Advance really took. That's where that seed got started. That's where it started to take ground. We, myself and one other instructor that I had worked with on Fort Wainwright, had agreed that something needed to happen, something needed to change. The VA wasn't helping these guys. The Army has not done enough to set up accountability or community amongst these soldiers to be able to help them. Um, we decided that we wanted to make some change for ourselves, and we were tired of watching our friends die. And
Yeah.
so we started what we were calling Limitless Advance, which is a play on military terms or tactical terms of the limit of advance, which is kind of that barrier, I guess, that watch line between the enemy and your encampment in combat. It's typically a very unique landmark of some type, whether it be a river, a stream, a field, something that's easily identifiable, but it's that safety barrier between you and the enemy. And what we chose was to name the program Limitless Advance, and hope that we can use education and jujitsu, the martial arts, to show and be that barrier between the enemy and the darkness, and our home camp, our soldiers and current and former, who are dealing with these same struggles, whether they be physical, mental, emotional, or any combination thereof.
So what how does that manifest? I mean, that's obviously that's the big goal. What does that look like on a day to day, on street level? Getting that help out there.
So we're a fairly new organization. So we're still working on getting our name out there.
Yep.
Ultimately, what we've been able to do so far is through the presence of social media, which is where I also met you.
Yep.
Um, and love social media or hate it, it's a great way to reach large numbers of people and spread awareness for causes like this. Social media has been a major player for us. My own personal experience or reputation here in the state of Alaska in my martial arts career has also led me to be able to spread that word a little bit quicker through the many schools here in the state who are also very well connected. Um, and in addition to that, we've got a lot of contacts from 20 plus years of experience between myself and some of my coaches all over the country. We've got contacts who are chipping in and helping spread the word. What we do and what the foundation does is, or excuse me, the nonprofit does, is that we vet current and former military members who have 50% disability or greater. We vet them in their disabilities. We vet schools around the country in order to find a good fit for these applicants and these athletes that are applying. We try to find a school in their region who is safe to be able to coach and instruct disabled service members, preferably somebody who has military experience,
Yep.
and are also trauma informed. So once we find those schools, we're able to place the athlete into that school and give them a year of free training, a gi, a rash guard, and a belt, and in order to hopefully introduce them to the same type of um, the same type of community, mind body awareness, and healing that I've also been blessed with in my own life, as well as the lives of many of my students and friends that have also expressed the same thing that you and I have both experienced. Um, so that's kind of how we operate. You know, we're trying to introduce people to the world of jiu-jitsu. We're not taking existing athletes, blue belt and above. We're strictly sponsoring folks who are white belts or have never trained at all in order to give them that experience.
Yeah. I like that you. I'm glad you brought up trauma informed because and as somebody who's been doing this significantly longer than I have, I'm curious what does trauma informed jujitsu look like in your mind?
That's a real broad question.
Yeah.
In my mind, that's a big a big answer. You know, when I'm looking for a coach or a school that's trauma informed, I'm looking for somebody who has experience in either personally experienced or has experienced coaching people who have suffered trauma and knowing what the telltale signs of these traumas are, what the triggers can be, and how they can actually work with those triggers,
Yeah.
and instead of forcing people into making decisions they're not ready for. I think in a lot of schools, wouldn't say all of them certainly, but in a lot of schools, coaches can kind of be hard ass, and they don't really care if you want to do something or not. You're going to do it because they said so.
Right.
And that can be really difficult for certain trauma types where you know unfortunately a lot of trauma comes with a feeling of really not having control over your life. And our goal is to give people the confidence and control back.
Yeah.
So putting them into a trauma informed school sometimes means that the coach is less pushy and willing to work with somebody on their level, whether it be
Yeah.
mental and emotional or physical, and is willing to and able to identify with that person and teach them in a way that's most beneficial to them individually.
Yeah. I think for a broad question, you summed it up pretty well.
No,
So,
thank you.
well done. I remember I was looking just kind of looking around online for like trauma informed schools to see what was out there, and I found one in Australia of all places. I don't know, it just came up in the
Interesting.
search, and it's this woman opened it. I don't remember her name, but she kind of describes what the trauma informed part was, and there was a lot to it. But one of the things that stuck out with me that is super simple is as you're leaving the mat, you give a thumbs up, and
Mm,
everybody's kind of just the group is paying attention. And if you leave the mat and you don't give an affirmative that you're good, somebody just discreetly checks in with you. And I was like, boy,
I like that.
something that simple can really, if somebody had a tough roll and it triggered something as simple as just giving a thumbs up when you leave can really like make a difference. And I thought I was like, there's, these, you talked about kind of the broad scope of it, but it's like there are so many little nuancy things that a coach or an academy or whatever can institute that can make such a huge difference with somebody, in that situation.
I really like that. I like that. Checking in with our partners is so crucial, not only during training but after training as well.
Right.
And it also helps build that sense of team and that sense of family and community, is knowing that your partners, whether you're friends off the mat or not, are
Right.
checking in on you and care. And actually I really like that, and I need to think about how I'm going to implement that myself. I like that idea. Yeah.
I'll try to find where I got that from and send it to you if I
Thank
can
you.
find it again, because there was a
Please
lot
do.
more to it. But that was the one thing that just kind of I was like, wow, that's so simple, but
Yeah.
profound. Yeah.
It's really interesting when you really start looking into these trauma informed schools and ways to become more um, conscientious and aware of trauma. And it's really interesting how those just very seemingly insignificant details like that can make such a huge difference in creating an inviting environment or one that is comfortable for someone to train in. And I think where my personal difficulty, I feel like I've found a good balance, but a personal difficulty in coaching and being trauma informed has been finding the balance between giving the entire school a good solid class with good difficult competition with good, making sure that everybody is getting what they came for, but not pushing them too far or not pushing those people who may have indicated some other internal struggles they're going through. And it really takes somebody who's aware and paying attention to body language and maybe maybe actual audio language. Like there's audible
Right.
languages, there's things that there are things that are obvious triggers that really takes an aware instructor to dial in on. But there's a balance there, and I think it's a learned skill like anything else. I've certainly not arrived anywhere, but I'm learning, and I think that that little nuance of a thumbs up like that, I really like that. That's one of those small things that we can do to help.
I think, you mentioned the community. I think the healthier the community, then probably striking that balance is a lot easier because you're not having to bring the entire the entire academy to this, oh, we have to all make concessions. Like when it's a healthy community, the understanding is, hey, if somebody wants to just flow or whatever, or for whatever reason they just want to like when you have that level of community and whatever that is built there, I think that probably is an easier balance to find. It's probably still
Hmm.
difficult, but it seems like the healthier the environment, that easier it is to get somewhere close to that.
I would agree. It's much easier to manage that and make sure that you stay as close to the as close to the balance line as possible. Yeah, I would agree. In my own school, I've been blessed with a doctor of psychology who's practiced for 20 plus years, who's also former military, and so he understands trauma very well, and both being on both sides of the fence realistically
Right.
when it comes to combat and soldiers. So he's a brown belt in my school. He's been with me for about 10 years now, and he runs all of my fundamentals classes. So I opened up a fundamentals class that we put all of our Limitless Advanced sponsored athletes into. And it's not a competitive class. It's an introductory class, and it's designed to be a 3 month course that gives them a full overview of all of the basic positions, transitions, sweeps, and defenses, and get them to about that first stripe level. And then at that point, our hope and our kind of what we're discovering is that these folks who come to us with these traumas are going through this fundamentals class with somebody who's very well trauma informed, who's able to help them through these situations that they're uncomfortable with, and by the end of that roughly 3 month period of time, then they get to choose whether they stay in that fundamentals course or join the general population of miscreants and the rest of the adult class. So
What a
um,
great asset to have with somebody with those credentials to give people their their start and give them a good roadmap, both from the trauma informed side and the jujitsu side. That's a what a wow. That's a great asset.
I absolutely am blessed beyond reason with that. Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
invaluable asset. So, yeah.
So for somebody who is of that population you talked about, where they're either still in or post service, or whatever their situation, and they're trying to get connected, what and maybe there's you know there's that first step is always the hard one, right? So maybe they're struggling with taking that first step to reach out and do I want to start training, and what do you say to them to try to get them over that initial step to get in the door?
I haven't quite unlocked the Rubik's of that, to be real honest with you.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard, especially when we are dealing with something very personal and intimate. Deep down inside, it's very hard to be vulnerable and
Yep.
to admit that I need help. So, um, I find that in a lot of these situations, just simply having a conversation and hearing people usually softens them up or allows them to know that they're safe, that it's not going to be a pissing contest on the mat. You're here for your benefit. You move at your pace, and it doesn't really matter to me if that pace is a rabbit's pace or a snail's pace. Being on the mat is more important than anything else as far as I'm concerned, because that's where I get to help and that's where my passion lies. But I don't think that jujitsu is the only form of therapy. If they're not interested in jujitsu and they're not comfortable with that, I have resources that I point them to.
Yep.
But I to answer your question honestly, is I don't really have an answer to that. Everybody has been different. Most of the people that approach us have been recommended by another friend, and um, if they're not being personally encouraged by myself, my coaches, or other coaches from our vetted schools, then they're being approached by friends saying, "Hey, you should really try this out. It really helped me," or "I know someone it helped a lot. Go talk to Limitless Advance. Go talk to the We Defy Foundation. Go
Yep.
there's quite a few programs like ours that also do the same thing, and I'm on board with all of them.
Yeah.
So I think I feel like people don't value their personal relationship with those friends or family members. They tend to not place enough value on their own relationship with that person when it comes to encouraging them to get help.
Yep.
And pointing them in another direction, say jujitsu, or we want our friends and family to get that help, and we don't want to see them suffer. But oftentimes, we have a proclivity to tell people just to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or deal with it or read this book or, well, how about maybe giving them another community instead? Give them
Right.
a healthy community of people to become involved in who care and aren't going to tiptoe around problems, but we care, you know.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm sorry that I don't, but
I mean,
it giws me pause
you're
for thought on
I,
that.
I think you're figuring it out like everybody else is figuring it out, because it's the same with, you know, with law enforcement. Trying to get cops to take that first step is also a
Mm-hmm.
challenge. And everybody I've talked to, nobody's really cracked that code either. So
Mm,
it's
interesting.
I think you're right though. I think everybody has a different thread that is the right thread to pull on, and it's a matter of figuring out what that is and
Hmm.
meeting them where they're at and trying to, those conversations, I think showing that being vulnerable is not the end of the world and some good can come from it, because both of those, both veterans and law enforcement, that's it's a high functioning, it's a field where vulnerability is not always a good thing, and that
Sure.
overcoming that is a challenge. And I think that if you can get over that initial hump, then you can start, making some progress. But it's certainly a challenge.
Do you mind me asking what was the catalyst that brought you to jujitsu? Was it somebody recommending it to you? Was it your own research? What was it that got you into jujitsu?
So I had been a fan of all the same stuff. Like I liked, I liked the UFC. I knew what a triangle was. I knew what an armbar. Like I knew enough nomenclature to watch and kind of, oh, he's armbarring and he's about to. but had never experienced it. And I
Okay.
was I was in uh, a admin position, supervisory position at my PD, and my recruiter who worked for me, who I'd known for years, we worked together for years in various capacities, was a brown belt at the time and had just gotten the approval, which I fully supported as his immediate supervisor. Like he had just gotten approval from the chiefs to do a blue belt program for the PD with
Oh well.
partnering with a gym that the PD was connected with.
Okay.
So he was like, hey, he was in my office all the time. We're talking about work stuff, and we would talk about that. And he was like, you should come to class. And I was doing a great job of disguising the mental shape I was in. Like I could put on, everything's great, and you wouldn't know that I was struggling. And but he just was like, yeah, you should come check it out. And it was just the right timing, and I was like, yeah, you know what, I should do that because I had a really good flexible schedule. I could make that work. So I went, and you've listened to the episodes, you've heard me say this, but I went to my first class, and my instructor now, because this other guy retired and moved away, but my instructor now was a purple belt at the time. I outweigh him by at least 30 pounds, and he got on top of me, and I was like, I can't do anything about this. Like, what is happening? And I mean, I'd been a cop at that point for probably close to 20 years. And I had been in some scraps here and there, and did all right, but I never went looking for a fight. And, I could talk my way out of them most of the time, but I was like, I can handle myself. And now I'm under this 55-pound guy, just helpless. I'm like, this is stupid. And then I just finally, like, I left there like, well, I have to keep doing this. It was kind of like, the obstacle became the path, because I was like,
Became the way.
I can't live knowing that can happen. And there was some, I think that mind body connection was part of it, where I left there like and still I leave the mat, like, no matter how hard rolls are, and I'm 52 years old, so everybody I roll with is younger than me, and where I train, like, I'm the old guy, everybody's younger than me, some of them are half my age, so every roll is a hard roll, but I leave there like feeling like I was in a car crash, but just euphoric, like I love this, and it's
Yeah.
bizarre. It's like my
Yeah.
knees, I'm having knee issues in both knees now, like I don't know why. I do know why, but it's just there. Yeah. So it was somebody, just the right timing, that, and it wasn't like you said, it wasn't, jujitsu is not the only thing out there. I also, around that time, got connected with, my therapist, who is great. Like, I had been going to somebody else and it just wasn't a good fit, and I took a break,
Mm.
and I recognized that I needed to go talk to somebody again, and found this person. And so the combination of the right therapist, EMDR therapy, and
Mhm.
jujitsu just was like the checkbox to get me back on track and toward
Awesome.
recovery. So
Awesome. That's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a real interesting approach and story and how you got into jujitsu. I wasn't. I did listen to the episode of the EMDR episode that you
yeah,
put out a few months back, but I don't recall the details of how you got into jujitsu. And it's really interesting to me that those two things worked in tandem and were beneficial to you in that way. Um, yeah, that law enforcement is one of those things that I don't know very many people who can survive as long as you did in a community like your own, that can't, aren't walking away with these same type of um, traumas that really should be addressed. And congratulations to you for having that desire to see your way through it. That's a big step.
yeah. It's the goal of this is to help more people find their way out, because it's messy, and it's, if you don't do something, it eats you alive. And
Mm-hmm.
similar to, I mean, it's just, yeah, I think the glaring difference is, um, the trauma is different. And I think, as cops, like, we don't deal with the same physical trauma that like that's, coming back injured and stuff deal with. That's certainly a
Hmm.
whole different level of, challenges to overcome. So,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. I think there are some similarities, high stress similarities,
yeah, yeah,
that we deal with. But you're right on a physical level. I would agree. But
yeah.
yeah, very interesting.
So the question I always kind of wrap up or work toward wrapping up with is, this is called Twisted Remedies for a reason. Mine is obviously jujitsu. I do cold plunges. I have a sauna now that I'm figuring out. That's kind of fun. Music is one of my things, as you look behind me. But I ask everybody, and yours clearly is jujitsu, so you can't use that answer. um, what other twisted remedies, if any, do you have that help you stay on track and stay well?
That's a real good question. Um, honestly, you said I'm not allowed to use jujitsu, but
I'll make an
jujitsu.
exception. You can use
Okay.
jujitsu.
Jiu-jitsu really has been that thing that has always brought me back to normal. I say normal in quotation marks.
Right,
I'm,
right.
it's that thing that's always kept me grounded. Um, Between my work with the military, continued work with the military on Fort Wainwright, and with the airmen on Eielson, my business and construction. And just the environment and surviving in this location in and of itself, there's a lot that goes wrong on a regular basis, and I'm a professional problem solver that is in constantly in a high state of stress. So, regardless of what's bringing that stress in, the body still has the same response with, chemically speaking, and it does really create a trauma. Um, Jiu-jitsu has always brought me back down. Um, it's that thing, that one thing that I can just have the worst day ever on so many levels, and I might not want to go to training. I might sit in my car. I'm the coach. I have to be
Right.
there.
Right.
I'm not allowed to let anybody know that I'm having a bad day once those doors are open. I now have to go in and lead by example and be a positive force and environment for everybody else on the mat, and then be able to teach them and coach them and mentor them, not only in jujitsu but in just being a good partner and a good person. And it's not always an easy thing to do. Sitting there at the doors after a bad day, just not even wanting to unlock that door, just wanting to go crawl under a rock somewhere. And jujitsu has always been that thing that just makes everything okay.
Yep.
And I would say that, since you told me I wasn't allowed to use jujitsu as an answer, which I get, I understand. I think probably my biggest thing that keeps me grounded and safe is spending time alone with myself, and learning to be. I'm a very busy person. I've always been a very busy person, and I'm realizing that that was a result of some of the things that I've also suffered through my life in not addressing myself and learning to be alone and to be happy and love myself on that level completely alone has been a real big part of my personal growth. And um, I maintain that by making sure that every so often, typically if I'm letting it go much more than a month, then I'm running the edge. I need a few days to myself, whether that's traveling or just shutting off the phone and the TV and staying at home. For me, I need to go inside my mind and clean out the cobwebs. And that personal time of facing myself, looking myself in the mirror, and dealing with those thoughts that creep up when I'm in silence has been a really big part of my own recovery. Um, and then surrounding myself with a real solid and positive community of people. Um, I don't have some diet plan to throw at you or some deep philosophy of saying like this is what I do is I run 10. I'm not David Goggins. I don't run 100-mile marathons or things like that. I find that peace um, through facing myself inside my own mind and then surrounding myself with a solid group of people. They say that we are the average of our five closest friends. And I believe that. And I have really been blessed to find a very small core group of people who are my closest friends and confidants. Um, and spending time with those people, bouncing ideas, talking about struggles, talking about goals and opportunities, and that small cellular level of core friends has really helped me through a lot of the struggles and has landed me where I'm at now. So maybe not so much a twisted remedy, but that's been um, my go-to.
That's fascinating to me that you like that introspective alone time, that's one of your go-to's, because that is so like that's where for me the dark clouds start to roll in and the negative voice is like and so it's like
Yeah.
that's fascinating to me that's your solace, because I'm not there yet. I'd love to. That
Mm,
sounds great, but like that's so contrary to like where I am when I'm like I try to fill space so I'm not, not there. And I mean I've come a long way
yeah.
with that from
Yeah.
before, but like that's so fascinating to me that you can be like you seek that out. Like that's so cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. I understand where you're coming from too. I've also been there. I think that's one of the downsides to our smartphones and tablets and
Yep.
our social media is that it gives us this mindless droning that we do, and we can sit there with, turn on Netflix and scroll on our phones for hours and lose hours of our day that way while not really being alone with ourselves
Yeah.
and addressing those inner thoughts, and it's an escapism. It's kind of a drug in and of itself. And
Yeah.
I'll send you a link. I can't recall the book name of the book off the top of my head. I'm really sorry that the name is slipping my mind. But essentially, the book is about facing the demons, facing the darkness, and you know, I don't want to say befriending them, but kind of befriending the darkness and befriending the demons and understanding them.
Yeah. It's
And
that
that's
shadow work.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, um, yeah, I'll send you a link if you're interested,
Yeah, definitely.
and yeah, that's
I can put that in
I
the show
think
notes too when you send it, so then
okay,
people
yeah.
listening can look for it as well. What how do people find Limitless Advance or connect with you if online, or any other things that you want to kind of put out there
Mhm.
for people to look up?
Yeah. So, just that question coming on the heels of bashing social media. I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook under Limitless Advance. You can find us there. You can also find us online and look at our website where you can apply to be an affiliate school or an athlete. You can donate on the website, and that's at limitlessadvance.org. It's all one word. Um, you know, I have never, I always have a hard time self-promoting or asking for money, that sort of thing. It's been so foreign to me. I'm a doer. I'm the guy who wants to go just get it done. Um,
Yep.
but unfortunately, in this situation, and maybe this is the next step in my journey, is learning how to rely on other people and put that out there, and knowing that and allowing other people to see that these type of things can't happen We can't help these lives and these soldiers. We can't help these people who've protected us and our country and given us our life without help. And whether that be help financially or help becoming an affiliate member, or there's many roles that can be filled. We need grant writers, we need admin, and there's so many things that we need help with that, regardless of the skill level or experience in life, there's so many ways to help. And we would love to be able to work with anyone who's interested in helping, and would love to be able to be in contact with anyone who might be interested in utilizing the nonprofit for their own personal interests. If veterans and current military service members. And real quick, this didn't get mentioned before, but I would like to throw it out there. One side of this nonprofit, due to the way that the nonprofit was conceived, really, with my work with the combatives program, and the loss of the athletes, things like that. One of the things that we do that I failed to mention earlier is, if you are a active duty combatives instructor in the Army, in any of the military branches, I'm sorry, it's not just the Army. This is open to all services. If you are part of a combatives or any hand-to-hand combat program with any of our services, we will also sponsor the instructors, so that we know they're getting proper training that they can then pass on to the soldiers, and hopefully through that way be able to add value to their training and the lives of other people. So throwing that out there as well. If you're a current service member and you're listening to this podcast, please reach out to us. We'd like to help you in that way as well.
That's great. Good stuff. Garrett, I appreciate your time. Thank you for, I'm a veteran, but that was it was a brief period. I actually used to fly over Alaska on the way to Korea and back.
Okay. All right.
But
thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you. I think the work you're doing is important. And as a veteran who made it out unscathed, there's certainly a lot of people who need what you're doing. So thanks for coming on. It's been great talking to you, and maybe we'll do this pleasure again. Thank you.
I would love to do that. Thank you very much for the honor.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Twisted Remedies with Professor Garrett Hartley of Revolution Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Fairbanks, Alaska. As you heard, Professor Hartley also runs a nonprofit called Limitless Advance that helps veterans connect to Jiu-Jitsu. Check the show notes for links to support Limitless Advance and connect to Garrett. As always, thank you for listening. If you would like to support the show, please subscribe, write a review, and hit the like button on whatever platform you're listening on. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.